Hello and welcome to the It Depends podcast. I am your host. My name is Kevin Goldsmith. I've been a chief technology officer at various companies for several years, and I'm the author of the book It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022. And for those of you who are joining for the first time, the way this podcast works is we are actually serializing in order the audiobook of It Depends. There's a separate newsletter that comes out on the weeks that the podcast doesn't come out that is serializing the book out of order. The podcast serializes the book in order. So between the two, you get different things if you want to subscribe to both. Otherwise, you can subscribe to one and you'll get the whole thing. In any case, if you're finding value from this podcast, if you want to buy the book, you can go to itdependsbook.net. And there's tons of links to all the various stores to buy the book there in whatever format you prefer, hardcover, softcover, electronic, audio. It's all there. So you can use that to find those links. This episode's chapter is the P word. And this is an article I originally wrote for Lead Dev, I believe. And it talks about politics and it talks about good politics. So in my mentoring and also my own experience, politics is a word that gets tossed around a lot. I hear it all the time from people I mentor or people I've worked with in the past. And used in the business context is almost always in a negative way. That environment is very political. And I'm not going to argue. I mean, I've worked at some of the, what I would characterize as the most political workplaces ever. I worked at Microsoft in the 90s. I worked at IBM, where you had to approach your coworkers or other teams with a level of healthy mistrust or distrust because you just couldn't be sure what anyone's ulterior motives were. And having come up through that environment, because I worked 8 years at Microsoft and a pretty pivotal. My second job was at IBM. My fourth job was at Microsoft. So these were pretty early kind of formative years for me, both as an individual contributor and as a manager, because that's also where I had my first management roles. It trained me in not a necessarily good way. In fact, a way I've had to, in subsequent roles, I had to kind of breed some of the lessons I learned out because these environments were highly bad political, and that became sort of my default way of doing things. And I had to unlearn that to go to other companies that weren't that way. Because if I didn't, I kind of came down like a ton of bricks on people sometimes who had no ill intent whatsoever. And so it took me a little while to unlearn it. And I still have it. I call it sometimes, I call it flipping the Microsoft bit. Depending on what happens and what I pattern match a situation to, I can sometimes go, that looks like something I recognize. That looks like something that's ill intent towards my team or towards me. And I'm going to react in a way that I learned at Microsoft in the 90s. And again, I've gotten better at recognizing it and kind of realizing it and just having a little bit more logical empathy to understand, okay, well, maybe that isn't a thing. I'm looking at that and to have a little bit more curiosity and just be a little bit more careful about it because I made some mistakes where I kind of assumed it was a bad political move, jumped on somebody, and then realized, oh, wow, that was a completely inappropriate response. I don't do it so much anymore. It helps, obviously, in my role as a CTO, I'm senior leadership. So, and I'm head of my function. So it's not like that happens that much anymore. And I'm also much more careful about choosing the companies I work in because I don't want to be in that environment. So I can usually always extend trust and assume good intent and not make that mistake very often. And if you have a similar experience that I do, that is the kind of key, is learning to assume positive intent instead of always assuming ill intent. In any case, the reason I wrote this article originally was because I did realize that some of the things I did learn in these highly sort of negative political environments were actually helpful for me still in a day-to-day world. I just use them in a different method. And in the chapter, I talk about this idea, like, what's bad politics versus good politics. Bad politics is trying to, screw over somebody else for your own gain. Good politics is trying to make it so everyone is successful. And you might use the same techniques to achieve either. And it's really what your intent is. If your intent is to do the right thing for everyone involved, and you take advantage of some of these techniques, that's good politics. If really what you're trying to do is undermine others for your own gain or your team's gain or whatever, company's gain, that's bad politics. And I wanted to differentiate these because I sometimes think that people might take advantage of a technique like, we joke about things like pre-meetings, but pre-meetings have a value, right? It's building a coalition before you enter the meeting so that you know your idea has support. That's a good thing to do sometimes, especially if you're proposing something controversial. But it feels weird to people sometimes. It feels political or like I shouldn't have to do that. The idea should just carry the day. And while I absolutely appreciate that sentiment, in the real world, that doesn't work as often as you think. You can have the best idea and you can express it well, but you're still running up against, I talked about this idea of pattern matching. Even if the other people in the meeting also have best intent, something you say might pattern match to something they, in their experience, and they're going to react in a negative way or a defensive way, even if your idea is very good. And even if with a little thought, they might actually be very supportive of it. In these kind of real-time things, or even like present on paper, it doesn't always work the way you think it is. And there's some things you can do to do it. If you look at, if you ever read books on change management or introducing change in an organization, organizational change literature, they'll talk about a lot of these techniques. And they'll use, the ones that are more agile or kind of, written in a different perspective. Well, they'll describe techniques that are inherently political, but they'll describe them in a way of just like making change management or making organizational change successful. But really, these are political maneuvers that they're using. They just give them nice names, right? Finding the champion skeptic, of finding the person who's going to disagree with you most and convincing them one-on-one so that if they then, if they're normally, you have somebody in your org that's like always dissing every idea, and you meet with them in advance and you work through their concerns, and all of a sudden you present it in the meeting and everyone's expecting this person to say like, whoa, that'll never work, or that's a horrible idea. And they go, yeah, this is a cool idea. Maybe it's a good idea. All of a sudden you've won the whole room. That's a political maneuver. That's a pre-meeting. And a lot of people just feel weird about it. And what I wanted to encourage is people to think about not the technique, but think about the intent and understand if you have the right intent, these are really important tools for you to use. And it may feel weird to use them because it feels like you're being corporate or it feels like you're being political. But if you're using them for good instead of evil, then they're 100% justified. And you should, and they're important tools to know. I use political techniques all the time. It's an important part of my job. I talk about three things, three techniques or three skills that differentiate politics for good versus politics for evil. But honestly, if it's the same for both, which is having empathy, using systems thinking, and being strategic. So you can use those techniques. Having empathy means trying to understand another person's motivations and why they might have those motivations. Being strategic is thinking and planning ahead. And obviously systems thinking is understanding how any one piece influences the whole. Now, using those three different skills, if you try and understand somebody's motivation and you appeal to their base motivation as a way to, again, get yourself ahead of them, that's using empathy for evil. If you're trying to understand somebody else's motivation, the example I use in the book is me trying to get my product to use AWS when we had corporate data centers. And at that time, we weren't using public cloud, but I really needed to use public cloud to launch my product. And the IT team was really dead set against it. And I went around them because I had to get my product out the door. But if I'd just done that, and I had to understand their motivations, I had to understand what things I would have to deal with, because I was kind of messing with the system and how the system worked in order to do it. But again, if I just screwed over the IT team and just went forward, okay, that's using, I was using my team's success to screw over another team in the company. That's kind of a jerk move. But I knew I couldn't get through them. I knew I was doing something that short term was the right thing. Long term would have been a problem. So then I brought them back in afterwards and tried to work with them and tried to get them to understand why we did it, what we would need from them in the future to switch to using them. It just wasn't what we could use to launch our product. If I'd only done the first half, that would have been politics for evil. Having done the second half, I don't know, the IT team would say I was doing politics for good. I think I was. And I was really trying to think of what's the right thing long-term for the company. Of course, now, this many years later, that company uses public cloud all over the place because it did have a lot of value. I don't know if they still have data centers. Maybe, probably. But the point was, by doing this, it was the right short-term thing for my team, it was the right long-term thing for the company. I didn't try and just run over another team. I tried to incorporate them, tried to support them, tried to get them to understand our problems and support them long term. I had the right intent, and that was the important difference there. So the chapter is relatively short. It's to introduce these ideas, and it's also to introduce these three fundamental skills that I think are not only important for sort of achieving goals, but are important for leadership. Having a level of empathy, understanding your peers, understanding your potential opponents, like another company, why are they doing this? Or another department, why are they doing this? I don't understand why the sales team is demanding these things. It doesn't make any sense. Well, try and understand what's motivating it. And that may mean you even need to do a little bit of research to understand what's really going on here. At that point, you're also thinking about what's the system, what's driving these needs. Understanding the systems you work in, having empathy for your peers, your coworkers, other departments, rival companies, and being strategic and thinking out ahead. It's a chess game. We're going to do this, and then they're going to do this, or we're going to do this, then we need to do this, then we need to do this. Those three skills, super important generally for leadership, highly important for achieving a goal and for getting others to support your goal, getting other teams to work with you, getting other teams to maybe do something that in the short term is maybe not great for them, but in the long term is going to be the right thing for them. Things like that. If you're a senior leader, this is also important skills to train within your organization, because if each of your managers working within the system you've built, and I see this happen a lot as well, are each trying to achieve their own little goals, they end up oftentimes competing with each other. And while they may achieve their own goals, your organizational goals are not met because each of them is maximizing their own part of the pie, and none of them are thinking about the bigger picture. And actually encouraging them by rewarding them financially, promotionally, whatever. If a manager in my team says, hey, you know what? I'm going to miss my goal this quarter because I'm helping this other team achieve their goal because that's more important to the organization. That's the right thing. That's the thing you're trying to teach. That's the thing you're trying to build. You want your managers understanding the bigger picture, understanding their part in the bigger picture, and doing the right thing for the company, for the organization, instead of the right thing for them. That is politics for good. So these are three skills I used to achieve this goal for my team, which was to launch the product in 6 months using this lean startup methodology, which the company really wasn't used to. But also my goal and the goal of my VP was to make it so we could do those kinds of things. So even though the IT organization wasn't set up to do this, wasn't really interested in it. They had motivations very different because they were responsible for IT security and governance and all these kinds of things. And introducing this completely foreign, new at the time kind of way of doing stuff that they had no insight or control into was really a problem for them. For the long term, that was the right direction for the company and for that IT team to understand why the system that they had built for all these mature products wasn't going to work for these new products was an important thing for the long-term success of the company. And so really, I was trying to work towards those bigger goals because those bigger goals were important to the company. The VP supported it, supported me in this effort, which gave me the protection I need. I had to do some politics to kind of protect this effort so it wasn't just squashed by the IT team. But because I was thinking about not just my own team success, but kind of the longer term goals for the company, and because I went back to try and support the IT team as opposed to just kind of screwing them over, it was the right thing. It was the right intent. And that's an important part of it. So here is the chapter, The P Word. The P Word, originally published on September 9, 2021. I've never heard the word politics used in a positive light when describing a work situation. On the contrary, the words corporate politics evoke memories of cynical executives in 1990s movies quoting The Art of War to their reports while figuring out how to undermine their peers. One of the Merriam-Webster dictionary's definitions of the word is political activities characterized by artful and often dishonest practices. I propose that we reconsider the word politics, especially when used in a work context. The word and the techniques ascribed to it are inherently neither good nor bad. You can use politics for ill intent or good. Good intention aims for a win-win solution, whereas bad intent aims for a win-lose solution. Instead, let's use this different Merriam-Webster definition for the word politics: the total complex of relations between people living in a society. For our purposes, let's call the company we work in our society. A company is a society in that it can have a panoply of personal relationships, group dynamics, shared goals, and systems of governance. If we can get over our initial reaction to being political, how can we use some of these techniques for win-win solutions to problems? Thinking politically means thinking ahead, being strategic, understanding the motivations of the people you need to convince, having empathy, and understanding the interactions of the systems you are trying to influence, systems thinking. You are working to make something happen, something you cannot do on your own. You may be working to overcome resistance to a new idea in a conservative institution. You could be trying to persuade another group to help your team with a project that will be good for the company, but might make that group miss their quarterly goals. Thinking politically will help you gain support for your ideas, soften resistance to change, and focus people on the bigger picture. If you improve everyone's situation, your peers will appreciate you, and you will find the way forward easier in the future. Conversely, done poorly, where you or your team move ahead at the expense of others, you will find it increasingly hard to gather support in the future. Playing politics so everyone wins, a personal example. In the early days of the public cloud, I worked in a company that already had established data centers worldwide. Getting a new server racked meant requisitioning a server from the central IT organization, following all their guidelines around the machine's configuration and which technologies could be used on it, and giving them access to maintain and manage it. The process to get a single server going with public-facing interface could take months. I was leading a new team trying to incubate an innovative product. We had adopted a lean startup approach, moving to get to market in under 6 months. As this was a brand new area for the company, we couldn't be sure how quickly the public would adopt the product, and we wanted the ability to add capacity quickly if needed or shut the project down if it wasn't getting traction. The company's lead time for servers was not going to work for us, so we decided to leverage Amazon's young AWS offering. I knew that this would be a controversial decision and might incur opposition from other teams, especially information technology. I could have chosen to ask forgiveness, not permission, and hope that my small team could fly under the radar long enough to launch, but that was very risky. Our actions could be interpreted as a deliberate avoidance of company security and budget policies, which could prevent us from launching if we were found out. I spoke to my peers and other teams to understand their prior experience working with the centralized IT team. I learned that if I approached the IT team directly for permission to use the public cloud, I would get an immediate no. That would put me in a position of having to get their decision overruled, which would take a lot of time and energy. I decided to go a different route. I put together a presentation on our plan for our product. I included our quick path to market to mitigate risk for the company, our plan to leverage the public cloud to scale quickly and manage cost effectively, and how we would address any corporate security concerns. The goal of the presentation was to build trust that my team was thinking about the business and not just playing with new technology, and to show that we had answers to the issues I expected other groups to raise. I portrayed our product plan as an innovative experiment in new product development, a low-risk approach to moving faster as a company. I wanted to get some protection for my team at a level that would short-circuit other teams worried about this new way of doing things. After working with my boss to ensure I had their unequivocal support, we got time on my SVP's calendar to discuss the plan. I prepared for any argument against the plan, but I also left room for input from the SVP to help them feel invested so they would help protect the project. We left the meeting with approval for our approach and moved forward quickly enough to launch the product within our 6-month window. The product was more successful and grew more quickly than we had planned. Our public cloud adoption made it far easier for us to scale as the number of our customers did. Our success also increased our visibility within the company, however. The teams invested in managing and growing our worldwide data center infrastructure now started to see us as a threat. I began to have many increasingly tense meetings with them to discuss moving into the corporate infrastructure. I could have used my product success to force the other team to back off, but that would have created even more enmity, setting up our teams for friction forever. Instead of using my team's success as a wedge to ignore the IT team's demands, I worked with them to understand why we had to make the decision we had. I also identified what they could do to make switching to the internal infrastructure an easy decision for us and for other teams considering following in our footsteps. I committed my team to switching to the company's infrastructure as soon as it could support us. Reading through that experience, you can see several political maneuvers I used to give my team the space we needed to ship our product. Talking to my peers to understand their experiences and anticipate challenges, consulting my peers on the problem got them enlisted as allies. If I were successful, they would have a better chance of success themselves in the future, which utilized systems thinking and having empathy. Building a strategy to prevent the central IT organization from stopping my team's plans, which was being strategic. Enlisting my manager meant I had an ally in my effort to convince other senior managers, someone who understood the SVP's motivations and concerns. Having empathy. Preparing my argument to the SVP not just to convince but also to engage, making the executive not just an approver of the plan but a participant with a stake in its success, being strategic, systems thinking, and having empathy. If I had stopped at this point or pressed my new advantage over the IT team, that would have been the type of corporate politics that people despise. I would have created a win-lose situation and some very angry coworkers who would have justifiably felt I'd wronged them. Instead, I took the following steps to help the group I felt I had to work around and improve the situation for everyone at the company. I used the lessons we learned from AWS to help the centralized IT team understand groups like ours with less predictable or forecastable needs, having empathy and systems thinking. I committed to them that if they could support our needs with our help, we would switch to the official infrastructure, having empathy and being strategic. Making sure we helped the IT team was more work for my team, but it was better for them and the company at large. It made the solution a win-win. An outside observer, especially a jaded one, could look at each of my actions in a very different light. That observer would say that I schemed to isolate the IT team, skirted appropriate behavior, and cheated by going over their heads. If I hadn't then gone back to help lift the IT team, I might agree. One might say that the best thing to do would have been to work with the centralized IT team to convince them that they should allow and support my plan. I would agree with that sentiment if it were possible to gain the IT team's support and ship my product on schedule. However, the experience of my peers told me otherwise. Those who have worked at large corporations with siloed functions working against different goals understand how intractable those other groups can be. Don't be a player of the P word. When faced with a challenge at work, try to understand the motivations of the people you work with and the systems they operate within. From there, build a strategy to achieve your goal. If you can achieve your goal while helping others move towards theirs in the long term, you will be an innovator and a team player within the society that is your company. On the other hand, if you achieve your goal at the expense of others, you will be nothing more than a player of the unspeakable P word. Thanks for listening to the chapter. If you have questions, if you just want to say hi, you can reach out. You can send me email, contact@itdependsbook.net. And if you do ask me a question, make sure that you let me know if it's okay for me to answer in the podcast or answer it in the newsletter, if it's okay to use your name. If I don't get those, I'll just assume you don't want me to do that because I have gotten some questions and answered them directly because the person didn't make a point of telling me, yeah, please go ahead and it's okay if you want to use it or use my name. And if you want to get the book, please do. I highly encourage it. It's available anywhere you buy books globally. It's available everywhere. If you're looking for specific links, you can find it at that itdependsbook.net website. If you have bought the book, thank you. Thank you very much. I've been continually surprised at how well the book is doing. Obviously, it's not ever going to be a New York Times bestseller, but it's already exceeded what I was hoping for. And I certainly just want to encourage as many people who might value from it to read it. But if you do, what would really help would be to review it. Even if you have criticism, that's fine. I'm totally fine with that. Yeah, obviously, if you liked it, that'd be even better. Please review it wherever you acquired the book and let other people know that you found it valuable. I have seen a few reviews and it always makes me, of course, very proud when people have found value in these things I'm doing. So I will see you again in 2 weeks. Obviously, if you want to subscribe to the newsletter, you'll hear from me next week. That is kevingoldsmith.substack.com. Or you can get to it from the itdependsbook.net website. Thanks again. See you next time. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.